Good morning. Big data is one of those concepts that can mean anything and nothing. It's very overused. I've prepared a list of replacement two-word phrases, but I think my two panelists here can make it a little more real and concrete. So let's start. Give your elevator pitch. What is it you do with big data to help people get it, keep it, make sense of it?
You want to start?
Sure. Interana stands for Interactive Analytics. And our goal is to allow companies to deeply and meaningfully understand their own proprietary data about their users, their product, how their market relates to the users, and to really lower the barriers for people to understand. So one of the things we do is we allow people to understand patterns over time. So a really critical, important thing to understanding how your product is behaving, how your users are behaving, is understanding how it's changing over time in those patterns. We do this for a number of big name customers. We do it for Comcast. We do it for Microsoft Bing. Every search that happens on Microsoft Bing, every rant that happens on Reddit, every meme that happens on Imgur goes to our software.
And my company is DAQRI, and we provide an augmented reality platform that would be displaying the kind of data that Anne's talking about. So DAQRI is a 300-person, 6-year-old company. We operate in 4 countries. And our rugged, wearable augmented reality products, the DAQRI Smart Helmet and the Smart Glasses, are providing data and training and helping to reduce errors and improve efficiency for industrial businesses in dozens of industries, including manufacturing, aerospace, construction, and many more. And one of the ways to sort of think about how augmented reality and big data interact is that AR is really the interface that makes big data and the data associated with the IoT visual and actionable in real time.
You know, this being Star Wars Day, one of us should have shown up wearing that helmet. So let's talk about the volumes of data we have in, sorry, did I say big data? Binary donuts, the volumes of it. To what extent are storage costs and latency still constraints?
For DAQRI's, storage is not really a constraint at all. We do think about optimizing latency constantly. So really, in order for us to provide the service of augmented reality, we are processing big data in real time. So our devices are processing full frame images at 90 hertz and essentially creating a surface map of geometry of the space around them in order to then be able to augment and layer digital content on top of the real world. So we're really dealing in big data just in order to provide the service of AR.
I'm going to really jump on the latency train, because when you have slow access to big data, be it your software is slow, but what actually happens for most people is that they have to go and they have to find someone who's a data expert to answer their question. And so the latency can go from, hours to weeks. And when you have that sort of latency, you're not able to ask interactive questions. What you really want to do is you want to ask some easy, quick question like you would on Google. When you search on Google, you can misspell it, you type something really fast, you get an answer back, you iterate, and that's exactly what you can do with Interana, is you can ask a question, get an answer back, and then start to dig in. And so the sub-second latency that we get with our questions on really enormous data sets allows people to really start to, we call it cognitive enhancement, so really just kind of add like this layer to your brain where you can really just always have access to what your customers and your product and your market is doing.
We were talking earlier about how augmented reality also in a different way provides a cognitive enhancement. So we think about making information more accessible, and there's a visual component to that. If you're making something visual, it's easier to understand, it's easier to break down a complex idea. But there's also decades of research that shows that using AR interfaces actually decreases mental effort and it accelerates learning curves. So there's all kinds of ways that you can essentially provide workers with greater capabilities than they would have had before.
So yeah, an important thing here is not just getting all this information, but helping people make sense of it. Part of that is analyzing the data, part of that is presenting it to the user, the customer, the client. So what have you learned over the last few years about making sense of that? We're not talking about giving somebody a pivot table in Excel.
Well, we think a lot about engineering psychology. So we're working with one of the top experts in the world today in engineering psychology for head-up displays. And there was a lot of research that was done over the years for head-up displays for airplanes. So you think about, what does a pilot see? They have their controls, they may have their altitude, their speed, the different data points that they need to control and navigate the plane. If you don't design that interface well, then you can actually cause airplane crashes. And that's a phenomenon known as attention tunneling. We think a lot about the same types of issues because we're creating a head-up display, but that's worn on, as glasses or as a helmet. And so we're taking a lot of those principles from airplane design, from head-up displays design from other industries, and applying them to the use of, head-up displays at the scale of a human being walking around the world. So one of the big differences, sort of, for those who aren't super familiar with augmented reality, and if you're thinking about how is it related to virtual reality, well, you can't do virtual reality while walking down the street. So augmented reality is preserving your situational awareness and enhancing it with that digital information that is adding to the scene around you, and thereby helping you to improve your decision making while maintaining that situational awareness.
I mean, I think what Gaia's company is doing with spatial, awareness and understanding the data you need to know when you're in that area is amazing. When I talk about user interfaces, I like to tell you what is the best user interface and what is the worst user interface. Also, let me start with the worst. So the worst user interface is something where it's a command line. You don't know what commands to type. All you have is this little prompt, and maybe you could type help and it will tell you some things. But if you're working with data and all you have is a command line prompt, you're really not going to get a lot of data, and you're going to need a lot of training, and you're probably going to need a specialist to sit next to you. And then go to what I think is the very best user interface to date for analytics, and that's Microsoft Excel. If you look at Microsoft Excel, it is so obvious to understand what's going on. You can have rows, you have columns, you can use it for your Girl Scout cookies, you can use it for your Fortune 500 finances. It's a very straightforward, easy to use interface. And so at Interana, what we've said is, Microsoft Excel is great. It has problems when you get above 1 million rows of data, which almost everybody who's collecting data on their users and their product has more than 1 million rows. And it also doesn't talk to you about patterns over time. And so we've taken this, this idea of Microsoft Excel, this beautiful interface that is accessible to everyone across the company. And then we've said, how can we add this, an enormous amount of data? And so what we've done is we've realized that time-based data is critical. So really, people think, spatially, and they think in time. And to understand what patterns are happening over time really gives you insight and the ability to predict what's going to happen in the future and how you might influence what's going to happen in the future. And so the Interana booth is actually right over there. They're waving. And if you go to the Interana booth, we can give you a demonstration of what it's like when you can visualize the patterns of data over time. And it's really powerful, and it can be used by product managers. It can be used by analysts. You don't have to be a data expert to really start to get an intuitive understanding of your data.
So let's talk about some of the concrete changes and improvements companies have been able to do using your tools. You mentioned a couple of interesting examples yesterday, one of which would not have guessed.
Go for it. So one of our customers is Tinder. So Tinder has 8 billion swipes a day. And these are really important things. Tinder is enabling you, to find a date, which could be one of the most important things you've ever done in your life. And they have an interesting user interface where they allow you to swipe. They allow you to, upgrade, so you can swipe more, or you can swipe better. And then they allow you to have chat sessions. And understanding those patterns over time gives them deep insight. So if you think about a chat session, what can Tinder learn from patterns of chat sessions? They could, find out if people send, if you send a picture and then it's dead air, right? That's not desirable. They can see if you chat a lot and the frequency gets more, and maybe there's a date in there, and you're going to meet someone, that's a really successful thing. And so they can use those patterns that they're seeing in their chat sessions to tweak their algorithm for making matches, to understand if someone's being successful or someone's not being successful, or even if someone is really kind of abusing their system, and how to disincentivize certain actions.
I'll give an example in the construction industry. Maybe I can see a show of hands. Is anyone in the audience in industry at all? Construction, manufacturing, a couple? Okay, so you guys are thinking a lot about quality, you're thinking a lot about efficiency, you're thinking about communication between teams and collaboration, which are themes that are across the board. So one of the sort of characteristics of our devices that differentiate them is their ability to process really dense data formats, and to do that at 7 times the capacity of our competition. So what does that translate to on a construction site? You're standing on a construction site, you can pull in CAD data and all of the building information model data that is showing what the building is going to look like when it's complete. And you can look at all of the different layers of information within that. So you might have different vendors who are responsible for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and they're able to see and deconflict where there may be problems and issues before they actually start the building process. And you have that as a tool that's guiding you step by step as you go through the entire construction cycle. And that's an example I think a lot of people can relate to and kind of know that industry. It's the exact same thing when you're going and building a wind turbine or a train or an engine. Those are the kinds of visual step-by-step instructions where we're providing that guidance visually, and we're documenting all of that along the way. So we're really playing on the display side of big data, where we're pulling from all of these business systems and we're displaying it at the right time. But we're also actually on the capture side of that as well. So our device has a dozen sensors that are taking in data, and we're actually able to create large data sets. And that's where I really see AR and these wearable devices playing a role in advancing and improving the sciences around big data, because you can't design an effective algorithm unless you have the data necessary to train it, if you're thinking about neural networks and AI. So those are kind of how the story of AI and AR are going to be intertwined.
Whatever contractors worked on our 97-year-old house before we bought it really could have used that sort of holistic view, having seen some of their work.
Sorry we couldn't have finished it sooner. It's ready
You know,
now.
this is like 17 years ago. I don't think processing power was up to the job then.
No, probably not then, no.
So there is a risk also of collecting too much personal data. In the US, privacy laws often amount to capitalism, yay. But in the EU, they are much more strict. The upcoming General Data Protection Regulation framework is going to impose a lot more limits. So to what extent do you have to watch out for that? I was thinking of Tinder, for instance, where they can probably maybe not do so much with that data in the EU versus in the US.
So question is it personally identifiable, right? And so there's cases. So Interana sells software. We do not analyze your stuff for you. You know, your data is your data, and that's extraordinarily important. I think you run into a lot of problems if you're taking, industry-wide data and you're compiling it. It's really hard to clean that data. Often, there's been a lot of incidences where someone thought they'd cleaned the data to make it available, and sure enough, if you triangulate on the street and the school and the, and the phone company, you can tell who that person is. So I think it depends what your goal is, right? And if your goal is to understand how other companies are functioning, you really have to be careful. With Interana, our goal is to let you know how your product is functioning, and that's your company's proprietary data. And people spend an enormous amount of collecting this data from their users. And what happens is some companies do it better than others, right? And so if you do not have easy access to this data, and if you can't ask these iterative questions of your data, your competitors might be, and you're just gonna slowly lose out as they gain insights as the products change, as the market evolves, as users change their habits. You really need to be on top of this stuff, and so companies, I think, should collect as much data as they can on their own product. It's when you do these kind of market-wide things that can be really dangerous with privacy.
So focus on the product, but the user...
Focus on your data.
Yeah.
Make your product, make your customers as successful as possible. But don't share that data with other companies. Don't do that.
That is a very good idea.
So for us, we think a lot about transparency in terms of data collection. So we're 100% transparent with our users in terms of anything that we're collecting, and we base that on their consent. We also contractually require all of our customers who use our hardware to form privacy policies that are in line with industry standards and to be transparent about what data they're collecting and how they're using that data. So for us, it's we understand, like any big data company, that we can provide more tailored services. For example, what is your preferred level of lighting within the device? What are some of your user settings? You would like to have those conveniences in your user experience, but you have to know how your data is being used, and you have to have the choice to agree or not agree to that.
Yeah, it's good to hear things like that, because I've talked to so many startups where their instinct is to just collect all the data because, hey, you might have to pivot. You never know when you're going to need this extra dimension of data about your users. And then they maybe don't think so much about securing it, so then there's a risk if their database gets hacked. I remember talking to one startup where I said, your privacy policy is really terrible. They said, that's a placeholder. We needed that to get into the App Store. We'll get a real one later on. That's just not how you want to do business.
Right. Definitely should not be an afterthought.
Yes. So I guess the last question here then, we've talked about picking out the data that is important and then cleaning up the data that's not. But then you never know when you actually will want some extra insight afterwards. So how long do you tend to keep data around in your systems so that maybe, you mentioned Comcast, you mentioned Sonos, 2 years from now there's a new market dimension and they decide, hey, we needed this after all?
So I'll start with that. So we operate in the EU as well as in the US. So we're compliant with EU law on this point. And in order to keep data, you have to have either a business reason, it has to be active. You have to actually need it for some reason. And that's what we adhere to in our data practices. And a lot of what we think about is we're not collecting data on everyone who's using our devices in terms of their personally identifiable information. We're really sort of a conduit for businesses who have existing databases and want to be able to visualize that data. And so we're sort of thinking about how do we provide a platform that enables them to connect up with the key systems that they require to do their business, but we're not the ones storing it and collecting it.
Okay, and you get the last word.
The last word. I think we think about it in terms of half-life of the data. So, how quickly does that value of the data drop off for you? And it varies by age of company. So like older, more established companies who aren't changing their product very often, want to look year over year actually makes a big difference for them. We have other companies that are iterating on their product so fast where week over week is all they need. And what we find is not older data becomes less relevant because you understand your product better. And you actually not only iterate on what you're learning, but you actually iterate on how you're taking the data. And so you often, when we install our software and people get the first easy glimpse of their data, they're like, whoa, this isn't what I thought we were doing. This isn't even what I thought we were recording. We need to look at all these other, we need to improve our logging. We call it logging with intent. We know this is what we like to look at, so we're going to be really careful about how we log it. We know these are the sorts of things that we want to look at across all of our product ranges. We need to be really consistent about how we log this stuff. And so it's actually not just the product evolving, but also the way you're thinking about the data, the type of questions you're asking about the data. And really, as your data skill increases, the data becomes more and more valuable.
Great. Well, I hope the half-life of this panel is worth to you as at least an hour, maybe 2. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks,
everybody. It was right over there.
Great. A big thank you there to Rob, Gaia, and Anne. So now, what's next? Up next, we have the Chief Innovation Officer and Global Head of IT for one of the world's most iconic brands. And he's going to lay out for us the future technology needs and strategies of global corporations. And he's going to specifically talk about how CocaCola is working with startups to get there. Please give a very warm welcome to Alan Bain. Alan, please join me.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Normally, when I've spoken at Collision before and I've spoken at Web Summit, I usually start with a series of Coca-Cola commercials. So this time I decided to bypass the commercials and see how many people actually wanted to hear what I had to say instead of seeing the commercials. But I did decide to take the opportunity to do a product placement here at the same time. What I wanted to do is to take you a little bit about sort of where I see technology going, where I see how enterprises are going to be using technology, and what we're doing at Coca-Cola to work with startups. So Coca-Cola has been around for over 100 years. We've been innovating in our bottle designs, we've been innovating in our products, and in more recent years we've been innovating in technology. Everything from our freestyle machines, which can pour over 150 different drinks that are based on medical microdosing technology, to things that we're doing for interactive Super Bowl ads, to all kinds of other things. So we're always incorporating technology into everything we do. But I thought it would be very interesting, and at least for me, and I think when I start looking at the future, I always look at the past. And the reason is, many years ago, I met a gentleman named Irving Waldowski-Berger, who was a senior fellow at IBM at the time. And he had a theory that actually we go backwards in order to go forwards. And so I thought it'd be interesting to just take a look at sort of the history of computing and see where we've been through the ages very quickly and understand how that's impacting where we're going in the future. So many, many years ago, and I hate to admit I do remember this, but everything was on mainframes, everything was on dumb terminals. So if you think dumb terminals then, you can think Google Chromebook today, by the way. It's a dumb terminal. Everything was dealing with disk drives. Of course, we don't have these big disk drives anymore. Everything has been shrinking down. But corporations also were doing a lot of home-built, in-house developed applications, and then started moving to sort of individually developed packaged apps. So we saw a lot of silo apps come around at that time. Then we ended up with the era of the personal computer. And we said, okay, now we got to link these computers together. So we ended up with the concept of client-server. And then all of a sudden, the web came about. And the web came about basically because of some research that was done out of Chicago initially that created the browser. And we ended up going there. And at the same time, the ERP vendors started getting on the scenes. And so the ERP vendors had the theory of, let's take best practices, let's take all these individual packages that have been developed over the years for supply chain and finance, for logistics, for marketing, for customer service. Let's just bundle them in and make it very easy for an IT organization to be able to do its business. The reality is what happened was we ended up commoditizing the IT environment because everybody had something that was the same. So as we're moving forward, what's happening now is we're seeing in some cases the breakup of this commoditization. Things are moving into the clouds, as we know. At Coca-Cola, we went onto a multi-cloud strategy, started it 5 years ago when I arrived. We had about 3% of our applications were in the cloud. Today, we're about 60% in the cloud. So you're seeing this rapid move. We're using most of the major cloud vendors because we have not found any real value in consolidating onto one. And the reality is each one of the cloud vendors, there's some very specific technologies, if you look at their roots, as to why you would choose one cloud vendor over another for different types of activities. Some of the examples that we've talked about before is if you look at the Google Cloud, for example. Google's roots were in search. Google also has roots in video. It has roots in analytics. If you start thinking about this, it makes them very, very good for deep learning type applications. It makes them very, very good for artificial intelligence. It makes it very, very good also for low latency applications because they actually will convert the protocols of HTTP into something internally and run it over its fiber. So if you want an application to run fast, have low latency, have guaranteed availability, Google is very good for that. We're using Microsoft for an Internet of Things platform because they've built out a very good application profile for Internet of Things. We're using Amazon for other things. We're using IBM for other things. If you take what's the best these clouds offer and you move your applications and align them up with those capabilities, you actually get ahead. So cloud computing has changed everything just as mobile has. I always hate people when they say mobile first. The reality is mobile's mobile. It's everywhere. Walking around here, all of us are walking computers. We have at least one device, maybe 2 or 3. You have to be working in a mobile world because we no longer sit at desks and perform functions unless it's just rapid transactions. IoT is another one of the terms that I always like to joke around with because how can you say Internet of Things? Because everything is connected over the internet. It's just things. We're connecting every devices, we're connecting people. A few years ago, I connected dogs. That was an interesting experiment. But you can also connect vending machines. We're connecting trucks. We're connecting everything that we have. And we're connecting them through mobile devices. We're connecting them through the clouds. And so what's on the next horizon is what's called node computing or fog computing. And you can see research going on underway in a number of institutions, a number of startups in the Silicon Valley and elsewhere, is this concept of everything being pulled together into a cloud. It's now going to be pushed back out because no longer can we wait 1,500 milliseconds, 2,000 milliseconds for a transaction. All of us almost have like an ADD type syndrome. We want things instantaneously, and we can't defeat physics. So we're starting to see compute, and we're starting to see research start pushing things out to the edge all over the world. It's going to allow us to deal with regulatory issues. It's going to allow us to deal with security differently, and it's going to allow us to deal with on-demand, real-time expectations. So if you look at some of the trends that have been going on, you can see CocaCola and every other large enterprise is right in the middle of this. You know, in 2015, we were talking about compute everywhere. We were talking about Internet of Things. You can see as you get into 2017, and I looked at what Gartner had here, it was actually pretty interesting. It's actually pretty right on. This is a little bit on the leading edge, but it's right on. Blockchain is going to be a major disruption to business. It's not just going to be Bitcoin. It is going to be how we ensure trust, how we actually get things done in the future. Huge upside potential. Last year we rolled out augmented reality at CocaCola to help our salespeople be able to sell our products, be able to convince our customers to what a display should look like so people could see this stuff real time. It's already happening. We've been working with virtual reality. Virtual reality, we haven't quite found the fit yet. There's some great marketing applications, but I did see in the Silicon Valley a few months ago, the first application of it to help service machinery and be able to get sort of this merger of virtual reality and augmented reality together. So all these things are changing, and it's having us to once again rethink where IT is going. So we've been mobile, cloud, and IoT. Now we have to start thinking about the future. So I like to spend my time trying to think 2 years out to 3 years out, and hopefully we guess it right. But these are things that we're actually seeing today, we're working on today, and in some cases, Coke has worked on these a few years ago. So we're on the leading edge of many of these trends. Now, if we look at what's happening from a business, a technology-related challenges, this is what we're facing every day. And again, myself and my colleagues at other companies, and again, Gartner did a great job on this, but a lot of what we're trying to do is not technology-oriented. A lot of this is process, a lot of it is people, a lot of it is IT operating models. These are the real challenges of the enterprise. So where people can help us identify what our real challenges are, or not identify, but help us understand how we can address these challenges, that's where the opportunity is. So the technology on the one hand is leading us to the future, but we still have organizational challenges, we still have regulatory challenges, we have governance challenges, things that are legacy from the past in our companies. So what do we have to think about for the future? How are we approaching it? This is really where the opportunities start coming in. You know, it's a puzzle. And traditionally, IT applications have been developed in silos and deployed in silos. We have to get to the point where we have a different mindset. We have to think about reusability. Microservices, which were made very popular by Netflix, I'm sure many of you are Netflix users, is one of the key drivers. However, we also have to get to what I call recyclable and disposable. No longer is a company going to be buying technology, amortizing it over 5-7 years, and trying to get value out of it, because the pace of technology that's happening, driven by many of you that are being creative in the startup community, is making it impossible for us to look at long term. So we have to figure out, what can we develop and reuse? What can we recycle, meaning something that we've done in the past that we can repurpose for today? And what are those things that we're going to develop and deploy on a mission type basis in order to do this? And so in fact, when you look forward, what's interesting is corporate computing's evolving. We've gone from these ERPs, we've gone to platforms, just like the Navy is. A platform is an aircraft carrier, an oil rig is a platform, and we've all moved into the clouds. What's interesting is, are we going to make the same mistakes of the past and use proprietary technology that locks us in and allows us not to be flexible and agile, everything that we need, or are we going to change and move forward? There was an interesting article that was written. It has nothing to do with IT, but you get your inspirations from different places. The US Navy put something out a few years ago about procurement, and the name of the article was Platforms versus Payloads. And the concept was, no longer can the Navy or any military spend $1 million to shoot down a $10,000 rocket. The economics don't work. So they needed to come up with a way to find the right technology for the right job in the right mission in the right situation. IT needs to evolve and do the same things, and that's where we're going. So we're looking at abstracting everything. We're using APIs. We're starting to think of things as Lego building blocks. We're starting to think of things as decks of cards. A deck of cards you can play an infinite number of games with, as opposed to just having 5 cards and being stuck with one game. So we're trying to think about, how do we put pieces of things together differently and create new and create the future. The beauty of it is that everybody that's here and everywhere around the world is actually coming up with new ideas. What we need to do is piece it together. We need the ability to crowdsource. And in crowdsourcing, we have to learn to work with startups. So new times require a new hypothesis. Okay? The disruptive digital technologies are happening at a very fast rate. No corporation is actually able to handle it by themselves. Traditional approaches don't work. We have to look outside. We have to be more open. So we created a program that's called The Bridge, which is how we work with startups. Now, the challenge with working with startups is that many of you looking at this, when you think of a company like Coke, everybody wants to work with Coke. The challenge we have is that we are in over 200 different countries. We have needs around the world. People need to be able to scale if you're going to work with us. We have things called indemnification clauses. Every corporation does, which means if something goes wrong, it's your fault. Don't look at us. And by the way, there's going to be financial consequences. Security guidelines are becoming more and more important. You need to adhere to strict and stringent security. Culturally, we don't know how to work with startups well. Global, we are this big, large company. We need to make sure that you're going to be in existence, that there is staying power, that you have financial security, that you have the resources. But most importantly, if you're going to work with us, you have to help tell a story and convince us that you're going to be able to address all of these things and you're going to benefit our business. So we created a program. We launched it in Tel Aviv 4 years ago. Last year, Turner Broadcasting Company joined as a partner. This year, Mercedes-Benz joined as a partner. And it's all about working with startups. So the Bridge program, every year, what we do is we work with the investment community, the accelerators, the incubators, the universities, and we put out major themes. We say, bring us people that are reinventing marketing or thinking about how to reinvent customer service or working on health and wellness, these major themes. We bring them in. 150 applicants are screened by the venture community and the investors and others. Out of that, we read all 150 applications. 75 of the founders are invited in to pitch. Out of the 75 founders, we select 12 to work with at the most during a year, and the year is for about a 7-month period. The first 2 years of the program, we ended up performing 63 pilots in 27 countries. We ended up issuing 9 contracts, and 3 of these were global contracts out of a total of the 19 companies that were in the program. So this is actually a lot better success rate than many of the acceleration and incubation programs. In fact, the accelerators and incubators and investors love us because we're actually providing real-world experience to the startups, and at the same time, the valuations are rising in the second round. So this program is very good. We've opened up a similar program in Mexico City to serve the Latin American markets, and we're testing another program we call the Bridge Community in Atlanta in order to try to develop the Atlanta market. So this is a win-win for everyone. Coca-Cola and its partners win. Our startups are winning because they're getting the experience, they're able to talk about working with Coke. Our technology partners from Amazon to Google to Microsoft to Salesforce, and everybody is providing free technology to our startups to help them get a leg up and move forward. And the VCs and the investors are winning because the valuations are rising. So by looking at this as a partnership, by not taking equity, I'm not impacting anybody's cap table, by not claiming anybody's IP, I'm letting the startups grow, and what I'm doing is I'm getting first mover advantage. And the first mover advantage is what's very, very important to us at Coca-Cola. I would love to have more people try my product every year. If I can get 500,000 more people to try my product every year, I'll make more over the lifetime of people drinking my products, everything from water to milk to juices to teas to coffees to the Coca-Cola product. If I can take 1/10 of a cent out of my supply chain, because I have the world's largest supply chain with more vehicles than DHL, FedEx, and UPS combined, that's what's important to me about innovating and growing my business. And all of you, everybody in the technology community can help us with these things, can help us with our social philanthropy work. We can help us create new jobs for women, that we have a 5x20 program, and that we're creating 5 million new jobs for women by the year 2020. Our new freshwater devices that we're putting out around the world in order to be able to provide fresh water in areas that don't have fresh water. All of these things, we all work together as part of a program to make it work. So I wanted to say thank you very much for the time. I apologize again, no commercials, but hopefully this was informative. Thank you.